Hey, it's Hozier here. I hope you're enjoying the video for the Selby Part 2. Thank you so much for leaving your questions. I have here everybody's question in a jar to my left, or at least many of the questions here, and I'm going to try and answer them. And let's see if we can get through them. So, Willow asks, could you share your emotions and experience behind the incorporation of the Irish language into your music? I can absolutely try. Thank you, Willow. It was a really, really good feeling. I mean, with the Irish language, it kind of, I might have said this before, but it's kind of like, here was this palette of colours, here was this array of mouth sounds and this inherent music to the Irish language that I had never approached and never used. It's like having a shelf full of tools in my house that I'd never used, and so it felt really good to approach that and use it in the work. It felt really amazing to record it, to bring that to LA and record it in like East West Studios. We were recording with this fantastic gospel choir. So sharing then the Irish language with them, what it meant, and trying to write out phonetically and share the pronunciation. That was just really rewarding and really fun. And hearing the language sang so far from home was really special. And I think that's something that draws me to use the language and to explore the language in the work is the prospect of it being sang by audiences while we play this music live, being heard by audiences around the world while we play this music live, is really rewarding and really fulfilling. And so I'm very proud to put that language into the work. Thank you, Willow. Lauren asks, what inspired you to combine the themes of The Third Policeman and Dante's Inferno into the same album? They fit together so nicely, and I'm curious about how that connection was made in your mind. Thank you, Lauren. I think part of it was that an early idea for the album was that this notion that all of the voices that you're hearing are kind of people who are passed on, you know. So, you know, Francesca obviously immortalized as this figure in Dante's Hell, Icarus in the song that follows, that there's these voices. There are all these voices that are singing from beyond, kind of beyond the threshold. And I think so. De Selby seemed to make sense in that. In a book, in The Third Policeman, it's a book about a man who is not to spoil. So anybody who hasn't read The Third Policeman, you know, cover your ears. But it's, you know, it's a book that deals with the infinite and takes place in the afterlife. So that really was part of it, you know. And I was also just fascinated by the character De Selby and how his sort of mind. I think he's just a really interesting figure, as outlined in that book. And there's also some of the writings of for De Selby Part 1. John Moriarty found his way into some of the feeling of that Part 1, De Selby Part 1. But it seemed appropriate with the themes of afterlife, and it's, you know, it's a book that left its mark on me. Something that De Selby thinks about as well too, or he imagines, or he claims to be true, is that the idea of continuity is a myth, or that it doesn't exist. That in fact life is just snapshots, infinitesimally close together, or it's so close together, I should say, that it appears to us that there's continuity, that we are in fluid motion, but really we're just any journey is just moments side by side, just frozen snapshots side by side, and every moment of our life is in fact just a sequence of frozen moments. And I think that's also, maybe there was something attractive about that when making an album. So here is this journey that is 16, separate pieces, you know. So thank you. Olga asks, your lyrics often have references to Greek myths, example in Talk, Sunlight, One Upon Leda, Icarian, Son of Nyx. Okay, fine, here, 5 examples. I was going to say, no it doesn't. No it does, it absolutely does, fair enough. I'm Greek and I've been wondering how come you're so familiar with our mythology. I mean, don't underestimate how significant those myths are, you know, globally. It's one of the, you know, I think some of the first stories, certainly in the kind of Western canon of literature, are like out of Greece. You know what I mean? So they're super significant. I mean, in like the Iliad, you know, and the Odyssey. But I think what I'm drawn to them is that myths are constantly playing themselves out around us, and I think every generation and every generation contends with the same stories over and over again, and we find ourselves in them time and time again. And what's important is to reinterpret them and interrogate them and appropriate them, or if needs be, subvert them or undermine them, whatever. But you know, we find ourselves in these stories constantly. They play out about us constantly. You know, the Sword of Damocles or you know, Icarus. They're these really useful vehicles for us making sense of the human condition and human predicament, etc. And there's also I just have a sense of wonder about them a little bit, you know. Wendy asks, what song currently lives rent-free in your brain? What song currently lives rent-free in your brain? What was I listening to? I'll give you 3. I'll give you 2 or 3. The last one that I was listening to last night, I think it's probably, I have a memory of watching a video of Robbie Robertson showing to Coppola. He presses play on a radio or on a tape machine at like 4 a.m. and plays Van Morrison's Tupelo Honey. So I was listening to Tupelo Honey last night by Van Morrison. Sound and Vision by David Bowie came into my field recently, a song I really love, which I remember from childhood. My dad used to play it a huge amount when I was a kid. And what else came into my field recently that I was listening to? Look, take that 2. Take those 2. I won't give you the 3rd. You only asked for 1. Sorry. Natalie asks, what advice can you give us to create the most appropriate atmosphere for listening to the album? What hour? With or without a drink? With all candles round? Seriously, how would you listen to Unreal on Earth if it wasn't yours? That's really hard. You know, I think if you manage, I'd be honored if you managed to sit down for 62 minutes and listen to it back to back. I'd be totally honored. So whichever way that is most appropriate to you, preferably on a good speakers or a good pair of headphones. You know, please not on your phone, and please not on bad laptop speakers if you can avoid it. If you have a decent set of speakers, I would love that, and if you can play it loud, I'd love that. In a way that you can sort of feel it. I was listening to some music in the dark recently, and that's a fantastic way to get into listening to music. So I would keep it simple, you know, but whatever way feels good to you. I recognize that most of us don't really, it's very hard to find that 60 minutes to sit down and listen to an album back to back. So I so appreciate it. I'm totally honored if you managed to even approach that. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. Joshua asks, you talk a lot about your lyrical influences and your general R&B and jazz influences. Were there any newer bands or artists that inspired you on this album? I'm not sure about this album, what to say about newer influences. Yeah, I mean, it's always happening, and you get to work with musicians that worked with other musicians, and that's so. I would say there's some songs on this album that Rob Moose arranged the strings for like I Carrion, and some other songs we worked on together, which you might hear again soon. But and Swan Upon Leda, which was released before Christmas last year. So like I would become familiar with Rob Muse, obviously, to listening to incredible artists like Bon Iver and Phoebe Bridgers. So, you know, those textures, those kind of harmonic like achievements. And then yeah, newer influences. I mean, I'd have to listen through the album again, but I mean, there's a lot of sort of classical, I won't say classical, but sort of classic 20th century sort of sounds on the album, which are still very prevalent. What I can say, who I'm listening to now, artists that I'm listening to right now, what did I just go back and listen to? I went back deep, head first, back again into Big Thief's first album and second album, and was just astounded by that writing by is it Adrian Lenker? I think is maybe the primary writer of Big Thief. Some of the lyrical achievements, some of the it's yeah, I was just astounded by the quality of that writing. Helena asks, now that you're on your third album, has the way you've approached songwriting or music making changed at all since your first EP? Thank you, Helena. In ways, the one thing that has changed on this album is that there is some songs. I always was very kind of covetous of my own space and time and my own ability to just disappear, write as much as possible. Like as in, I was quite controlling of the songs. I would write it and produce it as best I possibly could, but I was very in particular of the lyrics. And the melody, I'd get everything, all my ducks in a row, all the things that I couldn't live without on the song. Then I'd bring it to the producer and we'd sort of build it from the demo. That was often how I'd work. I did the same thing for the majority of the sessions. But there is songs in this where I, in particular, you might see on the writing credits where it's like Dan Tenenbaum and a few other names of people who were in the space. This was the first time where we just jammed, where I would just get into the space, somebody would just play, we'd just play some chords, make some noise, somebody would be on drums, maybe you might have two even drummers, two percussionists in the space, somebody on guitar, somebody maybe playing bass, somebody on a sample pad playing around with other sort of textures. Just this wonderful kind of, it's not even, just this wonderful sort of mix of sounds. And we would jam, and I would maybe hold a microphone and play with some phrases, play with some melodies, record everything, record 5, 6, 7 different ideas, different jams that were made without intention, just to feel our way into a sound that felt good. And then I would take those recordings away. I'd be sent, like those jams, the stems, separated all the instruments, and then I would sit with it and do the same thing I did all the time, for the first 2 albums. Sit with that chord progression, maybe write a new section for it, create some different ideas, but record a vocal part. So write the lyrics and the vocal part, and then record it to maybe chop up some of those jams, make sense of it, whatever. So it was collaborative in that sense. So like what you hear on All Things End is actually just those vocals were recorded in my Airbnb, where I would have been sent that jam into some sort of structure that made sense, and then I just recorded, wrote the lyrics, wrote my part for it, recorded it in the Airbnb after we jammed it. and then brought it back in. And so that's what changed. There's a bit more of a collaborative spirit in some of those, the starting point where we kick the song off together. Nika asks, what would you say are the musical elements that make Unreal or Unearth distinct? How did you come to adopt them? I think it definitely mixed with I think my time with Jeff Giddy deepened my appreciation for analog synthesizers, for vintage analog synths, and for a time I became a bit of a dork with them, and I really wanted to explore mixing acoustic sounds, acoustic or organic sounds with vintage synths, and we were working with a lot of vintage gear to get this kind of wonderful texture to this wonderful tactile sort of texture to the work. So I think that's, you know, so there's that, and then also working with Dan Tenenbaum. He's a remarkably gifted violin player, and so naturally that comes out in the songs, but it meant that we could kind of lean into this thing that was like, okay, here's synth, here's strings, here's acoustic guitar in places. So that it was quite an expansive sort of sound. In that way it touched a lot of bases. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly. Ines asks, or Inez? I-N-E-S? Ines? Are the characters on the videos from this album connected somehow, or is it more of an anthology? I'm not sure how to answer that. I think there's a thread to be drawn, like there is in any work or in any sort of series. There's a thread, but it's kind of just, sometimes that's more thematic than anything else. I wouldn't say there's no Hozier cinematic universe, you know, that's, you know, that's, you know, I'll put it that way. Certainly not yet. Watch this space. Christina asks, if you had to pick one color that would fit the album best, which would it be? I think we did our best with that, in sort of capturing it in the inner sleeve. There's these kind of soft, this sort of soft pink and purple sky, these kind of earthy tones, but to me it was dark. I kind of wanted to always to keep it in sort of in dark colors, you know. It's an album that takes place in a dark space. Emily asks, what's one thing you love about the album you haven't had a chance to talk about yet? I don't know. You're picking the wrong day to ask me. I've done nothing but talk about the album now for the last 2 weeks. So if there is, I'd die of shock if there was something I haven't spoken about just yet. I think I'm really trying to find one. You know what? I enjoy the sort of double meanings in anything, but you know, something that when I realized I was working on that song in LA, that was a really early demo. I kind of even started writing that, I think, before the pandemic, in its early stages of that song, early forms of that song. But the verses are all, you know, I wish I was a body of water. You know, I wish I was a wave crashing over rocks. If I was I'd swap in a shot. I'd swap my body for a body of water. That's what the line is. But if I was a riptide, I wouldn't take you out. The second verse is saying, I wish I was a stampede. I wish I was 100,000 hooves. noise and the violence of it. And the third one says, I wish I was death. I wish I was, so the song is anything but, I wish I was anything but myself, I wish I had his job. And they read like kindnesses, all of the verses. If I was a riptide, I wouldn't take you out. If I was a stampede, you wouldn't get a kick. And the joke there is those are Irishisms that I kind of grew up with, that were ways of telling somebody or speaking about somebody who was quite undesirable, in quite an unkind way. And so that's why it's the circle of fraud. The verses on paper read like a kindness. You'd be safe with me, I'd look after you. But really, the Irishism there is the tide wouldn't take you out. If you wouldn't get a kick in a stampede. Those are these sort of rather cruel Irish idioms that people throw around, like to say something without saying something. You're saying somebody, you want nothing to do with somebody. You want to be as far away from somebody as humanly possible. And I think that's something I haven't really spoken about, and it's something that will maybe go over a lot of people's heads. Angie asks, were there any new instruments you used in this album that you'd never experimented or incorporated into previous songs/albums? Was there anything that you wanted to try but couldn't? Yeah, I mean, a lot more analog vintage synthesizers. There's a wonderful folk instrument, a South Korean folk instrument called a pipa that you'll hear in the Selby Part 1. It's this wonderful student from South Korea. Just happened to be in East West Studios that day with a bunch of these kind of exchange students, and we were like curious about what was in his carrying case, and we just asked him, hey, and he was really eager to show us, and he showed us this beautifully hand-carved folk instrument, and we just asked him would he be interested in taking it out and jamming over to Selby Part 1, and that's exactly what he did. And so that was a nice surprise. That was a really nice surprise. Yeah, I wanted to try anything that I wanted to try but couldn't. If there was, thankfully I've forgotten about them. I think there was probably. I've forgotten about them, but I'll remember them again for the next album. Or I'll do that. Adrian asks, when you're unsure of yourself during the album making process, how do you convince yourself to take risks? There is the kind of nothing ventured, nothing gained. Like you can always, like oftentimes we split the session. We'd have a second version and a version that we were working off, or we'd have a slightly more experimental version. It's something I have to really hand to some of the producers I worked with, Dan and Pete and Dan Krieger. They're so capable that we could be so far into a song and they would be totally okay with the idea of pressing pause and going, okay, let's totally do something different here. And I really admired that about them. How do you convince yourself to take risks? It's kind of about what feels right. I think you feel yourself, you have to sort of feel whether something is right to you and is aligned to you as an artist, as opposed to having some set rules and boundaries. If something is exciting, interesting sounding, but you know that you will feel authentic in it, or your voice will still ring out authentically you inside of it, and feels authentically you in it, then I think you're maybe in safe. That felt safe to me on this one. Sharana asks, how did the concept for the Selby Part 2 video come about? The credits list both Hozier and Gleason for conceptualization, so I'm very curious to hear the video is conceived. I have to say, I have to hand it to Don Gleason. In the early conversations, it literally was just, a large part of it was Donal, like, listening to the song and then just saying, hey, like just saying what he saw, listening to the song and going, I think our first phone conversation was, here's the images that I'm seeing, and here's what I think might be fun to explore. What about this guy who's bringing a shovel everywhere, and in places that seems strange to. Why does he bring a shovel into a pub? And even maybe he's not sure what the significance of this shovel is, but he is compelled to see out this thing where he goes to this place and he digs a hole, etc. And we kind of just landed, we sort of just spitballed off this, and he had these early images. And Debbie of Wolf James Creative, the director, big part of these conversations also. We would sit in these conversations. I was abroad, I was on tour, but we just have these phone calls, the three of us would chat, throw ideas around. But Donal was really like, you know, conceptually, that first sort of, what about this, you know? What about this image? And then Debbie so brilliantly of Wolf James, you know, captured it. Donal put in this incredible performance. 3 days of his life he gave to that video, and the full energy of his body and his spirit. It really, I was so astounded by what he put into that. I'm so grateful. So, Laura asks, do you feel like this is the most personal album you've made so far? I know you like to write songs from the perspective of lots of different voices. So does Unreal Unearth feel more like your voice? It does at times. At times, I did allow myself to like step into another voice. But I have to say there is reflections on it that are absolutely deeply personal. There's ones that are just based on my observation and trying to reckon with certain thoughts that are very much absolutely my own. Songs like Butchered Tongue. I think the Selby Part 1 is really close to my heart. And it's of times sitting late at night in the kind of Wicklow countryside. There is some sort of personal reflections on that for sure. Like all songs, they always start from a personal place. Some divert, or they'll reference something. I just like that there is maybe one or two threads in a song that you can sort of find. You can find if you dig, or you want to pull it up out of the ground. But there is some personal. I don't know if it's the most personal. In some ways, it is. In some moments, there's personal stuff, but I don't think there's any album of mine that doesn't feel very personal to me, to be honest. Zeke asks, how did you decide the order of the tracks for the album? Is it arranged chronologically by their respective circles? It is. It's arranged into the circles. Yeah, and that freed me from a lot of decision making with regards to track list, but it offered a huge amount of challenges otherwise, you know. And there was so many songs written and recorded for the album that there was contenders for each circle, which is really great. Like Violence and Heresy had so many contenders. But it really is, it's kind of, I think the way Dante arranged Hell was that there's limbo, there's lust, gluttony and greed, and all of these circles in his poem, obviously they had these sort of rings within them, where he conceptualized these punishments would be done based on the nature of these infractions, you know. But yeah, but I did it in those circles. Manuel asks, what Unreal Unearthed song in your opinion feels unequivocally you, and why? It's been a long day. What Unreal Unearthed song in your opinion feels unequivocally you, and why? Yeah, it's kind of similar to the last question. You know, I think there's a huge amount of my I've a huge amount of love for the Selby Part 1. I have a huge amount of love for First Time. A lot of kind of personal reflections on that. A huge amount of love for To Someone from a Warm Climate. I was trying to capture that. I have a huge amount of love for that. and yeah, I'll leave it at that. But I mean, I love them all. They're all my children. Alina asks, you said in an interview that you wanted to create an album that existed above and below ground. In Francesca, we clearly hear the voices of her and Paolo. And I Carry is Icarus Waking Up Dead. Are there any more voices on the album that reflect back on life from perspective of the deceased? I mean, the Selby is a big one that jumps out. Just right now, it's a character in a book about a man who doesn't know he's dead. I gave a spoiler alert earlier on, but there you go. That's the ending. But yeah, let me think about other characters. I had so many more that are in the sort of, they're on the sort of cutting room floor. There was a song called Hymn to Virgil, that was from Dante's perspective, and then there was about that. There's this part where, you know, Virgil can't go to heaven, but it doesn't make it just so in that same way of in Francesca trying to turn the punishment on its head. I had written this song that was Dante doesn't go to heaven, because how could he do that after he's just been walked through hell by Virgil? How would he leave his side after that? How would he accept those systems that he just walked through? That in another reading, he doesn't accept the legitimacy of this place, and he doesn't go on into purgatorio. He stays put, and he says, if you can't go, I won't go either. So that there is other songs to come, and some songs were kind of playing with the idea of dead and the dead. There's a song called Empire Now, the martyrs of our revolution. Their spinning caused the earth to quake. This idea of all of the people who built our world, gave their lives for it, are now spinning in their graves. The martyrs of our revolution, their spinning caused the earth to quake. The problem brought its own solution. They power now the world we've made. This idea of hooking up turbines to the graves of dead revolutionaries. Yeah, so there was more. There is some there. Some you'd have to kind of go digging for, but we're going to release more as well too. But I did find a challenge in sticking 100% that every song is a fictional dead character. I just realised I folded that into what looks like the perfect shape of a mouth. So there you go. I don't know what question that was. Oh yeah, that's the same question. Amanda asks, if there was a song off this album that you had to perform every single day for as long as you live, which one would it be? Every single day for as long as you live. Are you the architect of my own hell, Amanda? Perform every day for as long as you live, which one would it be? I really like singing Unknown, you know. And there's one actually on that previous question of characters. Unknown, you know, references that sort of underground space, being in that cold place. Having witnessing a heart stuck in somebody's teeth. It's playing with that image of Lucifer chewing on traitors of history, on Brutus and stuff. I think I really like singing Unknown. I really like singing that. I like playing it, I like singing it. And what other song would it be? I don't know. Yeah, maybe Unknown. I'm just gonna say that. Like if you're really deciding, then I'm gonna have to do it every single day for the rest of my life. Michaela asks, what is your special relationship with nature, and particularly soil that always comes back in your work? What is your special relationship with nature, and particularly soil, that always comes back in your work? I was surprised to see the word soil there. I think I'm going to reference a song that was also recorded in these sessions. A song called Wildflower and Barley, which was written in the pandemic and trying to make sense of lockdown conditions. Ireland, there's a lot of poets from Ireland whose work, as I've grown older, I've come to gain a deeper appreciation for it, a deeper appreciation for the land, as it were, the land that I come from. The way Seamus Heaney writes about the tactile nature of ground in, collections of poetry, Opened Ground, his series of poems about bog bodies, punishment, the Grabble Man. He writes all of these fascinating ways. He describes the way that he describes the ground, the way that he describes the soil. My goodness, one of his translations, I'd have to pull it up, but he refers to the ground as the goddess, and that swallows our love and terror. I'd have to pull up that poem and read it. It's really dark, but yeah. So there's that. Then there's also a significance to the ground in some of our kind of songs that are like cultural, like of cultural importance in Ireland, I guess. So Wildflower and Barley references obviously barley, but if you're familiar with the folk song The Wind That Shakes the Barley, which that famous Cillian Murphy film is named after, it's a Ken Loach film. If you haven't seen it, I recommend watching it. If you're a Cillian Murphy fan, watch it. If you're interested at all in Irish revolutionary history, watch it. It's also just an excellent film. The Wind That Shakes the Barley is a folk song. Yeah, the film is named after a folk song that reflects upon the mass graves of that revolutionaries were buried in. So Croppy Boys that are referenced in Butchered Tongue on this album. And actually Seamus Heaney has a poem about these guys called Requiem for the Croppies, which is worth listening to. So the Croppies, or the Croppy Boys, were men with short hair. They were called Croppies because they cropped their hair, which was the style of young men who sympathized with the French Revolution at the time of 1798. So around 1798. And so if you had short hair, if you had short cropped hair around 1798, you were a young man, chances are you could be just dragged in and you could be pitch capped. Your head could be torn off you. Your sort of scalp could be torn off with hot tar, this thing called pitch capping. And you might have an ear chopped off. If you survived the pitch capping, they'd take your ear off so that you couldn't just wear a hat and hide your identity in the future. So that's what Butchered Tongue is referencing. In the ears were chopped from young men if the pitch cap didn't kill them. In cultural memory, those revolutionaries, they were these kind of guerrilla ambushers. They lived in forests and they moved quickly, and they slept in greatcoats, these big outdoor coats, and they kept in their pockets barley oats, so they could just eat raw barley oats as they moved and as they traveled. So in the cultural memories, when all of those men were buried in mass graves, the image that lasts is you can tell where they were buried based on these unusual growings of barley. So that in the landscape there were these patches of barley that just appeared in the wake of that revolution, and that barley began to represent the part of the revolution that's unkillable, that which cannot be buried, and the soil in that is significant. The ground is significant and there's, I think in that lyric in Wildflower and Barley, referring to trying to feel useful in lockdown, how to best conduct ourselves now for the benefit of lives in the future, let's say, in a time like that where you're kind of, there's all these questions. I think the lyrics are, it's going to take me a moment to recall them. This year I swear it will be buried in actions. This year I swear it will be buried in words. Some close to the surface, some close to the casket. I feel as useful as dirt. Put my body to work. So it was this kind of love song, but that also at a time when everybody was stationary and static and useless in a time of such crisis. I feel as useful as dirt. And I think there's also some part of that song is just trying to recognize the usefulness of dirt, the usefulness of soil, in that which facilitates the growth of something that cannot die, of something that is perpetual, will always come back, will always grow, that facilitates the renewing of a new generation, facilitates the renewing of a new world, that facilitates, in the words of those lyrics in First Time, facilitates creation, fighting off, like all creation, the absence of itself. So I think that's where, this is such a long answer, but if you're asking me what's the significance of particularly soil, of why it comes up, those are some reasons. It's playing with this idea that dirt is a very, very useful thing, and yeah, so that's a very long answer, but I hope that sort of gets you there. And that's actually all the questions. So well done, well done me, and also well done you for giving all those questions. I hope you enjoyed the Selby Part 2 video. I hope you're enjoying the album. It's out now, and sincere thank you for all of those really great questions. I really enjoyed answering them. Thank you.